Hello, and welcome back to the Deeply Rested podcast. I don't know about you, but I am a self-proclaimed perfectionist. I have struggled with perfectionism in one form or another most of my life, and I find that no matter how much personal work I do, how much healing work I do, my perfectionism persists. I've also found that perfectionism is one of the main things that I struggle with in my life that makes it hard for me to slow down and experience deep rest, right? Perfectionism pushes us to do more, be more, to continuously raise the bar higher and higher and higher. And all of that efforting requires a ton of energy. The more energy I'm expending on working, producing, being perfect, the less energy I have to turn inward, to rest, to take care of myself, to heal, to develop a spiritual practice. Whatever it is that's calling to you exists on the other side of perfectionism. So, I am so excited today to introduce you to my dear friend, Amber Petty. Amber helps creatives get bylines and build audiences. She's written for the New York Times, Parade, Bustle, and many others. And her clients have been seen in Huffington Post, The New Yorker, Washington Post, New York Times, The Guardian, Business Insider, and a whole lot more. After growing her business to six figures in the first year and creating an email list of over 11,000 people, Amber has helped hundreds of people write for actual money, get PR, and build a platform for their creative careers. Amber is incredible. She is creative, insightful, funny, and so deeply honest. She talks a lot about how to overcome perfectionism in her work, and I personally have learned so much from her in our professional and personal relationship. So I was thrilled to have her on the Deeply Rested podcast to talk about her personal experiences with perfectionism and some of the really unique and creative ways she has discovered she can overcome her perfectionistic tendencies so that she can do more good work in the world. I can't wait for you to listen to this conversation. Sit back, take a deep breath, and prepare to be awed by the most perfectly imperfect conversation about perfectionism you are going to listen to today. Enjoy this conversation with Amber Petty. Welcome to Deeply Rested, the podcast that helps people doing good work in the world take incredibly good care of themselves. I'm your host, retired therapist and disillusioned business coach, Maegan Megginson. I'm on a mission to help people like you unlearn the rules that keep you trapped in self-doubt so that you can recover from burnout and finally become deeply rested. If you enjoyed today's show, be sure to subscribe to this podcast and join our weekly newsletter at deeplyrested.com/newsletter. Now, it's time for the show.
Hi, Amber. Welcome to the Deeply Rested podcast.
Yay, hello.
I'm so happy that you're here. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling weird, but that's nothing to do with the podcast. I'm very excited to be here.
Feeling weird, but it's nothing to do with the podcast. For full context for those listening, Amber and I are recording this conversation the day before election results. And so the energy it's weird out there. It's weird out there right now.
Yeah.
We're all feeling a little weird. And yeah, I'm so glad you're here. What a perfect day for us to talk about perfectionism, right? Being in the midst of this kind of weird, intense energy. All right, Amber. Well, I would love for us to take 2 deep breaths together before we get started. Amber, I would love for you to tell me about a time that you felt paralyzed by perfectionism.
I mean, I feel like the first thing that came to mind was just like my life flashing before my eyes, really. Just all times and all things until very recently. No, a time I felt paralyzed by perfection. So I think the worst time of this, because when I was younger, I had perfectionism, but I would really push through. So I would ignore, body signals or emotional signals and just push through everything. So I might not be paralyzed, but I would work myself to death and just figured, well, that's what you have to do, right? So when I was 30, I moved to LA from New York City. And in New York City, I was busy all the time because you had to work a million jobs and I was an actress and all that stuff. And then in LA, I was not for the first time in probably since I'd moved out of my house to go to college. And with that extra time, I got all the feelings at once and it was bad. So a time I was very paralyzed by perfection was, yeah, I remember because I had just started trying to freelance write. Like I was just cobbling together transcription jobs and coaching improv and all kinds of whatever just to try to make enough money. So I started freelance writing and there was a place where I sent them one and they liked it and they wanted me to write another article. And this was just like snarky entertainment stuff. It was not deep dives into the Catholic Church or something like that. It was very, very light. And I just literally couldn't do it because it did just feel like anything I'd give them would undoubtedly be too embarrassing and bad for anyone to look at. And so then thankfully I went to therapy and that was started going to therapy. And that was a step, the first kind of step in getting out of how much perfectionism had become not just, oh, I'm a perfectionist or a default, but it's like it was my way of thinking and it was the only way of thinking. And I assumed that was the truth and like the law of all things. And so, of course, it wasn't like a thought that I was a failure. It was a fact. It was a fact that these things would never possibly be good enough. So then, thankfully, I went to therapy and then I did get to start writing and I started writing with real dumb stuff. But it paid me and kept, and I started to see like, oh, yeah, not everything has to be treated like the most important thing in the world.
Wow. Okay. There's a couple of threads here that I want to follow. First, I really appreciate the frame of this story that you had already had an article accepted and published on this platform. And they said, hey, we really liked it. Can you do another? And that's when the perfectionism really gripped you. And which I think is so interesting, right? And true for many of us perfectionists, the kind of people probably listening to this podcast, it's like we've achieved a lot. And sometimes it's like the more we achieve, the higher our standards become for ourselves. And then we just get in our own way. It's what I'm hearing. They weren't expecting like Pulitzer Prize winning journalism from you. No. They just wanted a quick, silly story. And your own system really blocked you from being able to produce your creativity in that way. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, because in that case, they'd like bought a story I'd already written, and it was about the 6 worst video game movies of all time. So again, nobody's lives are being changed here. And so then like, what idea do you want to do now? And then it was that double thing of like, oh, well, it's probably a fluke. They liked that thing in anyway, the first one. And 2, now I've got to come up with another idea. Then, well, undoubtedly that's going to be a disappointment and wrong. And so it's like, I just couldn't. That was the time where it really was just, it wasn't even just, oh, procrastination. I'm feeling, oh, it's hard. It's whatever. It was like, I can't.
Couldn't do it.
I can't do it. And again, I wonder if you're in that kind of space, please go to therapy.
Yes, please go to therapy. I feel like every episode of this podcast ends with, and please go to therapy. Okay, yes. I know I had this side thought just now of like, I wonder how many people with writer's block are actually experiencing like the grip of perfectionism.
Yes. I would say Most.
Mhm.
Especially
interesting.
when people say they have no ideas. I think,
Mm.
yeah, like, yes, with writer's block, sometimes there's genuinely, I don't know how to solve this problem. I don't
Mhm.
have enough time. I am exhausted. I don't have the
Mhm.
mental energy to do this. So there's lots of answers here,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
do think perfectionism is often the
Yeah.
answer. And when people say they
Mhm.
have no ideas, almost always that's because they're just rejecting all their ideas
Mm.
before they get a chance to even fully think them out, or
Whoa.
definitely before they write them down.
Okay. I want to circle back to that later. This
Yeah.
idea about ideas and how so many of us struggling with perfectionism get stuck or blocked in the ideation phase of
Yeah.
creation. So let's put a pin in that.
Yeah.
Right now, I want to follow a thread all the way back to your childhood, if we
Yeah.
may. 'Cause some of those things you were sharing a minute ago are so interesting to me that in hindsight, as you reflect back on your childhood, if I'm hearing you correctly, you can see the way in which perfectionism kind of always been a part of the way you've operated in the world. And you
Mhm.
can see that there were body signals, you said. Your body was giving you signals that you learned how to override in childhood. Can you paint that picture for me?
Yeah. So I was naturally a perfectionist and a smart kid growing up,
Mhm.
And so in school, I did, I was able to figure out, like, I could, I don't know, just sounds quite rude, but it's a fact. And also a brag about elementary school is really not much, but I could just easily get through school and get good
Yeah.
grades, like that wasn't that hard. And then as I got a little older, like into middle school and high school, I would figure out what I needed to do and
Mhm.
then do just that. So, like,
Mhm.
the first report
Mhm.
somebody asked me for in a history class, it was 11 pages. Then I saw everybody else did 1 page. And so I would figure out, okay, cool. I can
Mhm.
reduce the amount I do because how much I care about this
Mhm.
is medium. But I
Whoa.
loved acting and singing, and I knew I wanted to be an actress, right? I'm not an actress
Mhm.
anymore. Spoiler alert, everybody. But I wanted to,
I
so
mean, once an
that was
actress,
like,
always an actress, let's be
well, the
honest.
theater lives inside of me forever, Megan. What do you want me to
Exactly.
do?
Nothing.
Um, so for that stuff, that was very perfectionistic. And like
Mhm.
theater,
Mhm.
especially,
Yeah.
they'll milk you dry for that. There's
Mhm.
everybody tells you
Mhm.
you have to be the best and work harder, and the odds are against you
Mm.
and all that stuff. So it was very like a safe way to
Mhm.
me to like channel all that energy. And so
Mhm.
things like I would get sick at the end of every play, which I just thought is what happened when a play was over. I was just like,
Oh,
that's, you just get sick. I didn't realize that was like, no, you've been running so hard
right.
that at the first chance,
Right.
your body has to make you sick
Mhm.
to slow down. I would
Yeah.
get in high school, even before I could drive. So even when I was like 14, 15, I'd get really excited if I had an 8-hour day, which to me meant 8 hours outside of school, which I'd
Mhm.
occasionally have when I'd have like dance class and then voice lessons and then a rehearsal and then a show
Mhm.
at
Mhm.
night. Like,
Mhm.
I thought that was very cool.
Mhm. Mhm.
So then as I got older in my 20s, that's when I was getting more like actual anxiety,
Mm.
noticeable anxiety or noticeable depression.
Mm.
Even where I did. I mean, there were times I had to just like lay down on the floor in my dressing room and just breathe in between shows because I was like, my chest was tight and it
Yeah.
felt like I couldn't breathe.
Mm.
And it was just like, well, nothing to do about this. Like, literally, the show must go on. And
Yeah.
figuratively, it must go on because I also need to work 2
Mhm.
other jobs to make sure my bills are paid. So I guess
Mhm.
that's how that looked for me
Yeah.
in particular.
I really appreciate the reflection. It's true for me. I know it's true for so many high achieving perfectionists that when we refuse to listen to the signals from our body, or maybe a more compassionate way to say that is that we don't know how to read the signals coming from our bodies,
Yeah.
eventually our body will stop us in our tracks. I had shingles when I was 15. And like what you're saying, like at the end of every show, reliably, like bam, you'd be laid out flat. I love inviting people to really think about like their physical health and well-being and just being curious to track patterns. Like, are there ways in which like some weird illness reliably follows a period of stress? And can we maybe get curious, like how much of that stress is self-imposed? And like, okay, then we get to start just poking holes a little bit in this narrative we've created for our lives that makes the stakes feel life or death all the time. Everything feels so important. And I love what you're saying. And I'm just like, holy shit, Amber was like an incredibly wise child. That around middle school, you discovered this discernment that like, okay, wait, let me discern how much I care about something. First of all, the fact that you were able to, that you could do that as an adolescent is incredible. That's hard to do for me as an adult. Okay. So as an adolescent, you're like, okay, I don't actually care about history class that much, but I care about theater a lot. So let me moderate expectations for myself in history class, which proves that you were able to moderate your perfectionism. But then you didn't know how to discard it. So you just redirected the energy into another area of your life. And it's amplified. So your perfectionism was amplified in theater, even though you were able to turn the volume down on the perfectionism in other areas of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. And to me, that felt like, I mean, I needed to get good grades in school. So I cared that much, but that was it. I was like, my future does not rely on me knowing the missionaries that came to Washington State in order, like, nope. So I could really easily do that. But then the thing that I think hits a lot of creative people is that, well, I care so much about, acting and theater and all that. And especially when it's in the arts, you're kind of, I don't know, it's very encouraged from all sides that, yes, that is exactly how you should be. You should care so much you would do it for free. You should care so much that you would do it every day without fail. You should care so much you do any job in a theater. And that's stupid. It's like, it's not the way it should be. It just, it just sets it up so you can be taken advantage of, quite frankly. But I think that because you do care so deeply naturally, without any of those external signals, and you do want to make it your life if you do, yeah, that's harder work. It does require a heightened level of dedication. But then I think for a lot of people, and this was true for me 1,000,000%, was that was just all of my identity.
Right.
So then, when an audition goes wrong, I don't necessarily think, oh, I'm a failure, I did so badly. But when they keep going wrong, you just see it as a failure of yourself as an entire person. You aren't enough of an artist. You're not enough of an actor. And that's the whole thing you have made yourself out to be. And I think that's where I was anyway. And I think a lot of other artistic people can get caught up in that, where you don't separate. It's like there's no work-life balance at all because your whole self is just this artist. And that is a very hard way to live from my experience.
I want to expand this out, Amber.
Yeah.
Because I feel like the theater and the arts, it's a great microcosm for literally everything in our lives. And specifically, let's talk for a minute about our life as business owners. Because I think the same is true, that so many of us who are perfectionistic, people-pleasing, fill in the blank, we enmesh our identity with the identity of our business. And then they become so tangled up together that we don't know, where we stop and the business begins. And then if the business is struggling, if you have a rough lunch or your caseload's down or you're not growing your email list at the speed with which you intended, that again, you start internalizing that as like, oh, it's a problem with me. It's a problem about me. So as I'm listening to you talk about this experience, what I'm really hearing is the emergence of the inner critic. And I would love to hear a little bit from you about the relationship between perfectionism and your inner critic in your own experience.
So that was the thing. Again, I just keep going back to me starting therapy, but
great.
Hopefully it's interesting. So, because that's where my inner critic that would say stuff like, well, why would anybody want that? Or who would want that idea? Or nobody's going to like this, or these people aren't going to like you. I did not clock that at all as a opinion. I clocked that in my head as like, that's reality. That's me being realistic. That is the pragmatic, realistic side of myself that I should listen to. So it's kind of hard to even like know when that emerged.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. Certainly when I was a kid, because my inner critic had many thoughts on my vocal performances. So, you know, she's been around. So one of the things I think is hard with perfectionism is it's not always like that my inner critic is just like, you idiot, everyone hates you, you suck. It's just like, well, what are the chances somebody's going to like that? So they probably won't like that idea. And like, it's very easy to go, yeah, you're right. They won't. And then with the perfectionism piece of it, your own expectations for yourself are then just so high that again, it doesn't even feel like criticism. It doesn't feel like criticism, just feels like a fact. So it feels like, you know, somebody said, oh, can you get me a glass of water? And to a perfectionist, you're like, well, a glass, that's fine, but I should probably get them like a pitcher, and I don't have a good pitcher, and a crystal pitcher would be better, and I better filter it. And so I get the filtered water, and then you do all this stuff when really all they asked for was a glass of tap water. But we have built everything up. So it doesn't feel like criticism to say, well, that's just water. That's not very good. It feels normal. Yeah, it should be filtered. It should be in a crystal thing. Like, don't you want this to be good? That's the bare minimum for what a good glass of water would be. Whereas in reality, what is actually asked for is something you could get in 2 seconds. So I found the disconnect to me between those two things, what people are actually asking for and what you feel is minimum to deliver are just wrong.
Wow.
They're just wrong. And like, that's why, you know, writing these dumb stories, and I talk about this a lot, but like one of my first writing jobs was writing for Snooki from the Jersey Shore's blog, and they paid $20 an article. And at first I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. This isn't good enough, but I had to turn it in because I had to make money. And so I would, and then it would be fine. It would do well. It would be more than fine. And they would want more. And that helped me actually see, oh, what I think is enough is totally wrong. And what in fact is enough is much less. And then as you lower that expectation, I think it's easier to hear, oh, the inner critic is also wrong. That's not a fact.
Yeah.
That's an opinion. And it's not the truth. It's not accurate anymore.
I love the water example. That is so great. I'm going to hold on to that too, because it's true. It's like, it's a gut reaction. Like our expectations, our bar is so high for ourselves that we assume everyone else in the world is operating at the same standard. So someone asks for something and then we over deliver, like you writing the 11-page history paper instead of the 5-paragraph essay. And we have to learn how to catch that, how to catch ourselves over functioning, over delivering. That is so true. And the other thing I love is like, I feel like you're describing the evolution of your inner critic and how as you get older, she gets smarter.
Yeah.
Right? And sneakier and sassier. And she becomes a little less of like a critic, you know, like, oh, you're ugly and your voice is terrible. And she actually shows up more as like an inner skeptic. I'm not so sure about that. You know, she's asking these curious questions. And if we're not really attuned, really paying attention to ourselves, we can totally miss that the inner critic is present and just assume that those thoughts are wisdom, intuition, when they're not. They're actually quite destructive.
Yeah.
There's something really powerful about slowing down in our own individual process, in our inside life, like slowing down and really exploring our relationship with our inner critic, exploring the evolution of our perfectionism, and trying to like track back, like, where did these things originate in my life? Where it's because there's always like an origin point, and that origin point is like a seed that is planted in the land. And then that seed germinates and it sprouts and it grows and it grows and it grows and it grows until we get to the point in our life, if we're lucky enough to get to a point in our life where we recognize, oh, wait a minute, there's like an invasive species in my garden.
Yeah.
And I need to like get in there and I need to figure out how to just like to remove this invasive species. But it does require going back and really trying to understand, like, where did this start for me? So I'm curious. I'm happy to share about it for myself as well. So I'm not just, putting you in the vulnerable hot seat. But I'm curious, like, do you have a sense of where this all got started for you?
I mean, it feels like a lot of my stuff. So my parents were not like super critical of me or anything like that. They weren't at all. But like, especially my dad is very critical of everyone and has an opinion about everything and usually how it's bad. And so definitely sometimes when I'm even today, I'm like, God, why do I think this way? And then I visit my dad. I was like, oh, it's not mystery solved. So that's at least part of it. It's hard for me to plant an exact like point of it's when it all began, but
more than that.
But definitely like absorbing that was like step one. and yeah, that was step one, I'd say.
I really appreciate the way you're describing this, because this feels like true for so many people. It's not that my parents were terrible people, right? It's not that my parents were like super critical, but there was a way in which they existed in the world and in our home in a way that rubbed up against who you were naturally. I think that's what I hear, right? That like you probably, like most perfectionists, as we're like a very sensitive child. I find most perfectionists to be like highly sensitive people, empathic, like a big well of emotion, pretty easy access to your feelings. And when we're in environments with people who don't share those sensitivities and maybe interact with the world in a way that's more brusque or like a little bit more intense, it kind of gets into our system. So I really appreciate the way you're describing that about your dad. Like, he was a good dad, and there was a way that he's naturally a little bit critical, maybe a little bit negative, and some of that just absorbed into you.
Yeah.
It feels really important that you're able to track that back and name it. And for me, I can track it back and look at my family and some very similar themes to what you just shared. And also something that I've kind of excavated in my own therapy is that I was rewarded strongly when I did well, right? So I was like really heavily rewarded when I succeeded, when I did exceed expectations. Like, these were times when I got a lot of love, when I got a lot of validation. And the times when I was maybe more relaxed, a little bit lazier, resting, being creative with no outcome, right? Like those times like weren't reinforced. So I can just look back on my childhood and adolescence and see, and when I was in theater, right, I can see all of the ways that people really reinforced, yes, work hard, exceed expectations. You should always be on. You should always be giving 100% because you never know what moment is going to be important.
Yeah.
That's a lot. I mean, that's like 20 years of having that reinforced in our bodies and our nervous systems over and over again. Like, wow, can we meet ourselves with so much compassion? Because that's intense. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And then we somehow find our way into entrepreneurship where literally we're just like replicating all of those patterns again and again and again. Like, we've taken all of our shit from childhood and adolescence, young adulthood, and we've just like packaged it up in a different container called now I own my own business. And we get to like learn all of these lessons in new and interesting ways.
No, definitely. Because it is for me, so often it is just the same lessons over and over again. And I used to get really mad at myself of like, oh my God, like figure it out. This is the same thing again. But it isn't the exact same thing. It's like when you go into something a little bit different, it will enact like a similar fear. And so, that can be frustrating sometimes. But when you look at it, like, why is it frustrating? Of course, you're going into something different. You're doing something new. As entrepreneurs, we're constantly putting ourselves into situations where we have to learn something new, do something new, put ourselves out there, put a price on what we do. Like it's all a lot of vulnerable things in a row all the time.
Yes.
And so it does force you if you deal with it, it does force you to, like become a better person in a way. Maybe that's too bold, but like you have to deal with this stuff and learn something new about yourself and then move forward. And as you do that, you are serving your clients better and being a better business owner and being a better example of possibilities of owning a business and all that. But it does mean you get to face some stuff on the regular.
I say to my clients all the time, like, your business is literally paying you to work out your shit. Like, how cool is that, right? That like part of my job responsibility, part of what I'm getting paid to do is to do my own healing work. Because the more, and I think of healing as, healing as a spiral, right? It's like we're spiraling around and around the same core themes, the same core wounds, and we get to see them from different angles, different vantage points at different periods in our life. And we get to do so much of that through the microcosm of our business. And I think that's so cool. And it's like such a privilege that we get to heal our perfectionistic wounds while getting paid to do work that we like to do in the world. It's awesome. And it requires what you're saying. It requires a decision to be a person who is doing healing work in your life.
Yeah.
You got to make that choice.
I really don't see how you could not. I don't know. I don't see how you could not. I mean, maybe, I'm very sensitive. So maybe it's not an option for me, but it does. Yeah. You have to always be growing, but it's good. Like,
I would be super bored if I weren't trying to heal and grow. But we all know plenty of people who have opted out of healing and growth. And we know them and they're pains in the ass. Let's be honest. Like, don't love hanging out with them, but they do exist. So perfectionism. Let's just come back to this for a minute. Perfectionism. I'm so grateful to you, if I can just pause for a second, for sharing so vulnerably about how you experience perfectionism. I find it can be hard to find people having really honest conversations about perfectionism because we're perfectionists and we don't want to like reveal the fact that there's like a really messy undercarriage, that is like hiding underneath this kind of polished, high standard work that we put out into the world. So I think part of the medicine here is that we all just talk about the challenge of being perfectionistic, of struggling in this way, and that we let each other see a bit more of our messy process. Because when you share this stuff with me, like, I feel a little bit softer around my own perfectionism. So I'm really grateful that we're talking about this. And I know that you have some really great techniques, if you will, strategies, ideas, things that you have discovered in your own healing work that it's really helping you unwind your relationship with perfectionism. And I want to move us in that direction now, if you feel ready to talk about how we can overcome or combat perfectionism when it feels like it's making it hard for us to rest, right? When it's making it hard for us to create, when it's making it hard for us to move forward with our work because we're just spinning our wheels trying to find the perfect crystal vase and filter to prepare the, most ideal cup of water. So when we find ourselves kind of spinning, spiraling in perfectionism, what is one thing we can do to help wiggle our way out of that trap?
There's a couple of quick things you can do. So when you're really in like the thick of it, then that is not the time to like, great, I'll write my book now. That's not the time for those things. So like look at the smaller tasks you can do. And this is perhaps controversial, but also like if you're, so this is more if you're a writer, this is less for rest, but if you're a writer or you're an entrepreneur or something like that, where you have stuff publicly, right? Go on the internet and just look around for a while. Cause I guarantee you will find something that sucks and something that's garbage. And sometimes when you remind yourself, hey, because everything you think of in your head is just like the best business or this wonderful novel or your favorite writer. But then when you actually look around, there's a lot of stuff that's just fine. And there's a lot of things that will also piss you off because they suck so badly. And those things I find can be very inspiring because especially as a perfectionist, somebody else is making money talking about what you talk about, and they're doing a much worse job than you, infinitely worse.
Ain't that the truth?
And so sometimes, because I have found a lot of times for me, honestly, and again, I'm probably just a jerk, and that's fine. But I found like, oh, I want an inspiring story of like somebody who made it. And oh, they made their own movie and then they made it and they climbed this mountain and whatever. And then I just think, great. I'm not even as good as this grandma who lost a leg, but she still climbed a mountain. Like, it just makes me feel worse about myself. But when I see, like, just go to Elon Musk if you want to. You want a shortcut. You just go, anything I do would be better than that. And that's how I've started writing sketch shows, all kinds of things, simply because I finally got so mad that I was letting my own perfectionism stop me when nothing was stopping these other people. That can kind of help you do a little bit of something. So I just wanted, I don't know, that felt more, it's a jerky thing to do, but sometimes just being spiteful
I don't think it is
helpful.
Okay, Amber, hold on a second. You're always so quick to be like, I'm such a jerk. You're like literally the nicest person I've ever met in my entire life. So let's clear that up. And like, you're not a jerk because it's not like you're reaching out to these people and saying like, hey, shithead, like that was the dumbest article I've ever read. No, like we're not going to be mean to people.
No.
But I think this is such sage advice that when you are in the grip of perfectionism, don't look up. Don't look up for people who are really nailing it or like really succeeding. Like don't compare. I mean, this is the classic compare and despair trap, right? It's like thinking about your business. Like I have a policy. This is a personal Maegan policy that I mute or unsubscribe anyone doing similar types of work that I'm doing. Not because I don't care, not because I'm not impressed, not because I don't want to know what other people think or say, but because I know my compare and despair trigger is like really sensitive. And if I see when I'm struggling, if I see other people who are doing similar things as me and doing it in a way that I think is better or it looks like they're more successful, I'm really quick to go to a very dark place where I'm like, they have better ideas. They already did everything I was thinking about doing. They did it better than me. Like, who are you to do anything? Blah, 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 blah. So I love this advice from you, which is like, don't do that. Like, don't look at people who are on the outside. It seems like they've got it all together or they're really succeeding. Instead, turn to your left and observe. Observe like how much garbage exists in the world and bad articles and emails with typos and, people you don't
just
agree
people
with
and stupid ideas.
Dumb ideas. And yes. And they're making money. I love that. And why can't we be, judgmental and snarky and let that be a backwards way to inspire ourselves to greatness?
And I say that because that honestly tends to work for me better. And because you feel like you're at the bottom of the mountain when you're always looking up. When you look to the side or you look down, you realize like, well, I'm at least at base camp on Everest, actually.
Right. Look
okay,
how
I'm
far
sure
I've
I'm
gotten.
at the bottom of Everest, but Jesus, I'm farther than most people would ever even go.
Exactly. I think this is such great advice because, like you said earlier, part of like the curse of perfectionism is that we naturally almost instantaneously put the bar really super high.
Yeah.
We write the 11-page paper instead of the 5-paragraph essay, and we don't think about it. Like, that's just
And
where
it
we
didn't seem
default.
weird at all. Exactly. I was
Right.
like, oh, well, obviously. That wasn't me
Obviously,
even trying to be like impressive. It was just like, well,
no,
clearly
that's
this
right.
is
It's
what's
the
required.
default. And I think because that's our default, it's also our default to look around and notice people who are perhaps performing at that echelon. And
Yeah.
all that does is reinforce the perfectionism. So, okay, tip number 1, we're going to turn to the left and we're going to observe people who have stupid ideas and are making money anyways. And we're going to say to ourselves, if they can do that, then I can absolutely do this. And just
Yes.
see if that gives us a little boost of self-confidence and inspiration.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. My other one is kind of similar, but it is like do a half-assed job. It's mostly for perfectionists and people pleasers and things like that. Because we
It's
all know
people who
people.
aren't doing half-assed jobs
Yeah,
already.
exactly. We know
Yeah.
people that are doing a half-assed. They've nailed it. They've nailed that
Yes.
challenge. And we'd love them to quit nailing it so hard.
That's
I'm not
right.
talking to them. I'm talking to you. So with the half-assed job, that is just, it is not that you are purposely doing a bad job. You are just doing 50% less than you think you need to do.
Right.
And by doing that, and you can do this as an experiment for a week or a couple of weeks. By doing that, it helps you see where your default is. It helps you see, oh, yeah, my default was the 11-page paper. What I did that was half-assed in quotes, now that I'm looking at it, is more than enough. And so it helps you see where your default is. And it also just makes the task easier because as a perfectionist, because we want to do such a good job, yeah, if I ask for a glass of water again, you're like, oh my God, I got to go find another thing and like get the filter out again. Why would you want to do all that work? You don't. It makes sense that feels hard. Whereas if you're like, I don't know, just kind of half-ass something and see what happens, you will at least do it and start it.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when you get to that point where you've started it or even you've completed your half-assed draft, you will find, hey, this is actually fine.
Yeah.
And it wasn't so hard. And so sure, that might mean that you're not, doing your big screenplay you've always dreamed about or your big novel you've always dreamed about or like this huge business thing, where you're like, oh, that's my dream. But even taking any kind of half-ass step is just getting you out of that perfectionistic spiral of hell. And sometimes it can then even like rearrange what those big projects are. Or even if it doesn't, it still gets you something so that your confidence gets up so that later when you do tackle that big project, now you have the confidence behind yourself that you can work through it and get through it.
Yeah. I've heard you say before that when we half-ass something, we are recalibrating in our brains what it means to do a good job.
Yeah.
And I love that there's like a corrective experience that happens when you half-ass something. And again, reminder, half-ass for us means we go from overperforming to performing slightly better than average. Like,
yeah.
that's what we're doing. We're going from like 150% to like, I don't know, maybe like 70%. But most people are doing 50%. So it's like we're recalibrating. We're really just like giving our body, giving our brains, giving our creative selves a chance to experience. Hey, if you do a little less, you're still golden. Like you're still doing great. And you and I have talked about this before that the work is just to do that a million times. And it gets easier. Like as you go around the spirals, right? As you go through the spiral healing process of perfectionism, like it gets easier and easier as time goes on. Has that been your experience?
Absolutely. It gets so much easier as time goes on. And then it doesn't necessarily felt like at any point in my life I had some quantum leap where I was like, suddenly I'm not a perfectionist anymore. I just noticed like, hey, that actually wasn't that scary to do. Or I was able to just put something out there.
Okay, listeners, fun story. Amber and I just had to pause recording the podcast interview because my power flickered at home and all of my tech stuff reset. And so we had to stop the recording and then start the recording again. And I had this moment where I was like, Amber, did my audio go out? Because I have this like very fancy mic set up, right? Because I want it to sound perfect. Like I want my audio to be perfect on this podcast. And which I'll say more in a second about like how my perfectionism manifests in my business. But I literally, we're sitting here talking about perfectionism, and I literally had this moment where I was like, oh, do we need to go back and re-record when my mic dropped out because it's not going to sound the same? And then people are going to be like, oh, what a shitty pot. Like,
yeah.
how meta is this? Like, I'm like having a perfectionism moment while we're sitting here talking about perfectionism. So I'm not going to go back and re-record anything. And you know what? I hope it sounded really shitty for a couple of minutes. And I'm going to experience the healing of nobody really caring about the fact that just happened. What do you think, Amber? Am I totally off base?
No, I think that's great. And that's the difference is just, and I think that's such an example of like the difference of when you're used to just letting your perfectionism run the show, you would just then immediately go, okay, we need to go back and do this, and without checking it ever. And the fact that you go, oh, I don't actually need to go back and do that. I feel like that's how it works. You know, it's not that the perfectionism goes away. We don't want it to go away. Like you were talking about, it brings us many good things too. And it's expecting it to go away is just, I don't know, a fool's game. But
it's a fool's game.
It can work like that, where you have a couple seconds of perfectionistic panic and then make your life
talk
easier.
Yourself off the ledge. And this is actually highlighting a perfectionistic tip that wasn't on our list, but it's happening for me right now in this moment, which is to have friends and colleagues you can check yourself with. Right. I mean, it's so helpful. I know like Amber, you and I before have sent each other a new sales page and been like, can you tell me if this is absolute garbage?
Yeah.
You know, like, can you like, okay, or we'll send each other an idea like, hey, I have this new idea. Like, can you tell me like, is it total shit? And even right now being able to check with you and being like, am I crazy? Like, it's okay, right? If we let a couple minutes of the audio not be great. So let's just do a shout out for the power of social support, because I do think that one of the most insidious aspects of perfectionism is the way it isolates us socially.
Yeah.
Right. And it becomes very lonely. And like the inner critic, the inner skeptic, like she is the loudest when there is no one in the circle to be like, hey, girl, let me give you a reality check. You're great.
Yeah.
This is awesome. Keep going. Don't stress so much. So if you don't have those people in your life right now, people you can Vox or text or to go on a walk with who can help you reality check with love, but also assertiveness and clarity, find those people. I think it's so important. And Amber, thank you for being one of those people in my life.
Oh, well, thank you, Maegan.
Let's move on to your next tip about combating perfectionism, which is all about outrunning your perfectionism. Tell me what that means.
So this one, I do feel like, especially talking to a former therapist, I'm like, is this a horrible idea? But it does work.
No, I know what it is, and it's approved. It's retired therapist approved.
So outrunning your perfectionism. So when I do my writing classes and stuff like that, I tend to give really short writing exercises. And for half-assed stuff, I'm like, write for 30 minutes max, limit the time. Giving yourself deadlines doesn't always work, but if it does, like give yourself a deadline and try to stick to it. And I do that because sometimes, like in an ideal world, we would all be in therapy. We would be rooting out our perfectionism from the very start, but that takes a lot of time for that to really work, or it certainly has for me. So in the meantime, as you are doing that stuff, I don't know, I feel like sometimes just like outrun it. Give yourself a shorter amount of time, give yourself a tighter deadline, because if you have a timer for 5 minutes, it's not that you have the pressure to write a bunch of things or get a certain amount done in that time. It's just you've set up a timetable for yourself. So one, you don't have to worry, how long is this going to take? Well, this is going to take forever. And so it assuages all of those kind of thoughts. When you only have 5 minutes and all of your brain knows that, the voice that says, hey, I'll be with you in a second, when your inner critic likes to pop up, tends to be louder. So it's easier for you to go, you can come bitch at me all day and all night, but for the next 5 minutes, I'm just writing this. And when you do that, I find that you just come out with more ideas. It lets you just get the stuff out of your mind and onto paper. And this works well for copy, ideas for your business, sales, like any of that kind of stuff too.
Anything. I'm really curious why, because I've heard you say before, like, okay, I don't know, maybe this idea isn't therapist approved, or maybe it's not the healthiest. What do you think is potentially problematic about this approach?
Well, I guess because anytime you think of just like, we'll just outrun it, kind of feels like you're just running away from the problem. And so to me, it's not running away from the problem, or it's like you're not running away from the problem, but you're just outrunning it for now. Like you're beating it at this particular race. That's kind of how I feel about it. So yeah, I feel like sometimes when I say it, it sounds a little bit like just run away. Quit thinking about it.
I don't get that. I've never gotten that sense before. And maybe it's just a change of language. It's like outsmarting your perfectionism, because I hear you. Like our perfectionism, it's so default in our systems at this point. It's just, it's turned on all the time. Right? I carry perfectionism with me around like a virus, and sometimes the symptoms are louder than other times. So you are providing us with a new paradigm that we can step into to see, like, can I outsmart this virus for a second? Can I like approach this from a different angle that my perfectionism like doesn't understand? And the angle is constraints. That's what I hear, right?
Yeah.
Like give yourself constraints, timelines, deadlines, not timelines, sorry, time limits.
Deadlines
I think it's
business,
so brilliant.
For your own business, to me, I've been able to, like, if I say something's going to launch, it will launch that day. Like, that's a deadline I can stick to. Now, again, of course, there can be circumstances, blah, 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 to make that change, and that's fine. But I think giving yourselves those deadlines and make them, if you're just starting out or feeling really stuck, or it's been a long time with an idea that still hasn't come to fruition, giving yourself that launch date really works and I think it makes your stuff better, because otherwise you will use all that time and you will fill it with too much stuff, where to the point that it isn't as good for your clients or your students or whoever. So giving yourself those timelines for launches, I mean, I wouldn't have a business if it wasn't for, hey, I said I launched it here, so there we go. And if that means pre-sales, if that means do a beta round, like however it makes you feel comfortable. But I think that's a very good way, because it also gives you more information, where if your brain is thinking this isn't enough, it's not good enough, you get to go, well, these people gave their money to me. That's pretty good proof that it was good enough. And that's a very powerful way to recalibrate that sense of what's enough.
This is fantastic advice. And this is advice that like really resonates with the way perfectionism manifests for me in my life. I find that high achieving people who struggle with perfectionism, business owners, etc., we have very like elevated and discerning taste, right? And not judging people with different taste, but like we absorb and just like we love things that are delicious and elevated. We love like great novels and like beautiful websites and fantastic art. It's like we understand the potential of something, and we have this deep desire to create at that level, right? Who doesn't want to create the thing that they love to consume? But our skill set doesn't yet match with the quality of the stuff in the world that we love to consume. You kind of spoke to this earlier. Like, yeah, if you've never written a short story before, probably not fair to assume that you can just sit down and write like the next great American novel. Like, there's a lot of steps between here and there. For me, I find in my own perfectionism that I really have to check that within myself. Right? I really have to notice, like, who am I comparing myself to? I really like for things to be polished, right? I really like for them to be the best that they can possibly be. And it's so dysfunctional. It's like I want to have a sales page that looks like the most beautiful sales page of someone who's been doing this way longer than me and has way more resources than I do. And then I don't hit publish until I'm happy with how good it looks or how good it sounds. And all I'm doing is making myself miserable, right? Giving myself shingles again, holding back an offering that is really going to change people's lives, not making the money that I need to make to succeed. Like literally nobody wins when I am mired in like the fake rules of my perfectionism, which is why your suggestion of outrunning my perfectionism using time limits and deadlines is so incredibly liberating. I learned recently in a writing workshop that I was taking, they were reviewing some of the science behind flow states and like how we get into flow state. And one thing they said that really stayed with me is that it takes at least 7 minutes to get into a flow state, at least, which means like every time you sit down to write, expect the first 7 minutes at least to be fucking terrible. Like miserable, right? The inner critic, like bam, present, telling you you're stupid, you have no ideas, you feel like you don't know what to write, you can't trust yourself. And use those 7 minutes to just like give it voice on the page or the canvas or whatever you're doing. Just write about how shitty you feel, write about how dumb you think you are. And eventually you get over the hump, boom, and then you land in your own creative power and you start to create for, like you said, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And then your rule, Amber, that I never regret it when I follow it, is actually stop when the timer goes off. Stop, walk away, let it be done. This is like, oh my God, if I could encourage people listening to do just one thing that you suggest in this interview, it's this.
And it's hard. It's like, that sounds so easy. But I found for me, I have a very hard time taking my own advice there because I'll be like, well, I can just finish it up. I can just finish this part. And then it's 5 hours later and I haven't eaten anything. And it's like dark in my room now.
Right. Yes.
Still going.
Not good.
It's not a great way to be. But yeah, that
it's
break
part of the
will
perfectionist.
only fuel you, you know?
Yes, and it's part of the perfectionist saying, just keep going. Yeah. You can finish this. You can do more than 30 minutes. Like you can do 45. So yeah, there is something so powerful about stopping. I had a colleague in a different writing group actually, who I love this. She said, I always try to stop when I'm on a downhill slope, meaning like there's ease. When things are flowing, when there's ease, that's where I want to stop for the day. Because if I wait to stop until I'm trudging uphill, I'm like climbing on an uphill slope, I'm going to be less likely to want to sit down to resume tomorrow. Because who wants to like step into something hard versus if you left off when it felt easy, you're going to be a little more likely to step in and keep going. I thought that was really cool advice too.
Oh, no, that's very cool. And it builds up trust that you will come back and do it. Because I think that's which is like the craziest part of perfectionism, where it's that thought of, well, if you put it down, you're not going to come back to it. Oh, but you didn't, you're not going to come back to it. You're going to come back to it late. That was a thing. Yeah. I like kept worrying, because I still do it, but less of, I'm not working enough. I'm not getting enough done, whatever. And my therapist was like, has that ever happened? And I was like, yeah, this one project I did in 4th grade, I waited till the night before. And I was like, is there any other times? No. Okay, well, there's not a lot of evidence. But to me, it felt like, because I called myself lazy so many times because I wasn't doing everything constantly, that became like true to me. And when I actually looked at it, it wasn't. So when you can stop your work where it's easy and start again where it's easy, it also builds up that trust that, one, I'm not saving this huge climb for every single day. I can just come and do a little stroll and I'm still going to get to the end of the road. And two, that like, I'm not going to just abandon, I'm not a flake. I'm not lazy. I'll be right back tomorrow or the next day. And I'll want to, because doing this 30 minutes actually wasn't that bad. So of course it's going to be easier to sit down again.
This is such a great practice. And again, you can apply this practice to anything. Anything that you need to create, anything you need to do, like get creative with this practice and find a way to weave it into your unique brand of perfectionism, right? However you might be struggling, I think there's an application for this as a way to retrain ourselves or recalibrate ourselves so that we can step away from that perfectionism and really just chill out and experience the magic of how fucking awesome we are and how we create incredible things in the world that people want. And we can do it all with ease, and we can do it without sacrificing our health, our mental well-being, fill in the blank. Like, it is absolutely possible to produce phenomenal work and to be deeply rested at the same time, but only, like you said earlier, Amber, only if you're willing to choose to heal from whatever wounds are creating your perfectionism symptoms.
Yeah.
So we got to decide. We have to decide how are we going to work with this?
Yeah, because I do think it's easy to treat it as like a terminal case. And instead, to be real classy way to end this, Megan, it's just more like herpes. You know, sometimes it's gonna hold with us.
You're gonna get a flare up every now and then.
But there's lots you can do. You can live a full
no need
life.
to be ashamed. There's billboards about it. But you do have to disclose it to potential business partners.
Disclosing your perfectionism actually would be a good move. So you don't end up doing all the work.
Yes, disclosing your perfectionism is not contagious, but you should still disclose it anyways. Okay, last question, Amber, before we wrap up. I just want to circle back to ideas. Yeah. You have so much wisdom to share about this. So I want us to end on an Amber Petty soapbox. When people feel like they have no ideas, they're not creative, they don't have anything special to put into the world, they feel totally blocked, what do you want to say to them?
Well, the first thing I'll say is watch the show 2.5 Men, and then you go, oh, that has nothing good to say and nothing creative, and yet it ran for many years. So already you're doing better. So in the shadiest way possible, that's what I'd say. But that isn't true. So if you're a person who's not creative at all, you are not desiring to be creative. There are not Wall Street executives with no sense of humor and no creativity who are popping up to a deeply rest retreat or to a writing class to explore. They have no desire. So again, you're probably comparing yourself to people who maybe are wildly artistic, and that's not how you express it. Cool. So one, if you're asking yourself this question at all, you of course have some creativity naturally, and everybody has ideas. It's just that we're so used to ideas having to be headline news or something huge, or we think it has to be, it just has to be like completely original or completely unique because there's so much out there already. That if you put that as the standard for idea, okay, amazing, totally original, life-changing. Well, yeah, I certainly don't have any ideas that hit that at all. And so it feels like you have no ideas. So two little tricks for this that I do and I think really work, and they're very simple. One, if you're brainstorming, again, good time to use a timer, just do 5 minutes. And then and sometimes when you sit down to brainstorm ideas, your mind goes blank and you just go, I have no ideas. So just write that down. Just write down, I have no ideas. And then think, what else? And you might think, I have no ideas. Write it down again. What else? And you will then start to let your ideas come out, because we're not used to saying yes to our own ideas. We're often used to shutting them down so that somebody else doesn't reject us. So you can do that. Another little thing for ideas that sounds silly but really works is, again, set that timer and then just physically pick up something in front of you. So like I have a bobby pin, and then just whatever comes to your mind. So bobby pins, I might be like, oh yeah, what's the history of bobby pins? Why are they called Bobby? What does that come from? I saw an old carton and they were called bob pins. And so that's a little different. Oh, maybe it came with bob hairstyles. Maybe there's something about hairstyles, or I'd want to do something set in the 20s. Oh yeah, why did that hairstyle become? Oh, what brought the flapper movement into existence? So like, I'm just saying a bunch of crap off the top of my head, but those are all little seedlings of potential ideas that literally just happened because I looked at a thing that was physically sitting on my desk. And it always works. There's something about that like physical
and it sounds fun.
Connection. And it's very easy because I'm not telling you to have the best idea in the world. that's not possible. I'm just telling you
Yeah.
have any ideas.
Any
And that's
idea.
wildly possible.
And I love opening sideways doors, right? Like, okay,
Mhm.
maybe I go on the tangent about bobby pins, but what I'm really trying to do is access an idea about, I don't know, like my next offering, which is going to have nothing to do with hairstyles and bobby pins.
Yeah.
But when we can open the flow to creativity,
Mhm.
it's all going to come in. So open it with
Yeah.
something that feels like lower stakes.
Exactly, because even if you,
Yeah.
like, look at a bobby pin and you're thinking, "Okay, something for my business," if you're just like, "Huh, this is so simple and practical, it's been around for 100 years. What's, like, the simplest thing I have in my business? Or what's kind of
Mhm.
the most classic thing I have?" It can still very easily it could be just, "Hey, here's a big page of random ass stuff, and what kinda just felt fun and let me
Mm.
loosen up." A lot of the other time, it will still lead you into at least a hallway you wanna go down,
Yeah.
and it just opens that up, and then you'll start to see more ideas around you. The more often you do
That's
this,
right.
you'll just notice the ideas you have
Yes.
throughout the day, and you're not training yourself to
Mhm.
immediately dismiss them, so you'll
Right.
keep them and write them down or remember them.
Oh, this is all so freeing and liberating, and it's such a relief. It's also so funny that we started this interview thinking we were going to talk about 2 ways to overcome perfectionism,
I
but we
know.
actually talked about
I had to
5.
I had to add in
Um,
a bunch more. Yeah,
it was
see? It
great. So
never
let me run
ends.
through. It never ends. It never ends because once you open the flow, so much is
Yeah.
going to come in. We thought we were going to start with 2, then we opened ourselves up to this
Yeah.
conversation, and bam, organically 5 things showed up. So to summarize, we have look for things that suck. Be inspired by ideas, projects, offerings that you think are really stupid and poorly implemented, and yet they're still successful. They're still making money. Let yourself be inspired by how far up the mountain you are instead of always comparing yourself to people who are doing it bigger, better, bolder, brighter, whatever the case may be. Thing number 2, half-ass your projects. Give yourself permission instead of over-delivering like you're used to really dial it back and do 50% of what you thought you were supposed to do. This is a great way to recalibrate what it means to do a good job in your life. And then you have all of this extra time and energy that you can direct towards taking care of yourself, recharging your batteries, becoming deeply rested. Tip number 3, surround yourself with friends and colleagues that you can talk about your perfectionism with. You can reach out when you need a reality check or you need someone to mirror you back to you. Have the right people in place so that you can do that healing work together. Tip number 4, overcome procrastination by outrunning your perfectionism. So set deadlines for yourself. Put a 30-minute timer on. Make constraints around whatever project you're working on so that you're only doing it in little doses, and you can prove to yourself that you are phenomenal and you can get so much beautiful work accomplished in a really short, less stressful amount of time. And then finally, tip number 5, create some kind of personal practice to open yourself to the flow of new ideas. And Amber gave some really great examples of how you might do that, how you might create a practice to open that flow of creativity. And then stand back and be amazed by how incredible you are and by how much easier life can be, friendships can be, business can be. It can all be so much easier because let's be honest, a glass of tap water is just fine. We don't need grandma's crystal decanter with a fancy filter. Like, we don't need, it doesn't have to be that fancy. Like, let's go simple and let's meet each other with a lot of grace and create an environment of ease in our communities. And Amber, that's absolutely what you do for me in helping me combat my own perfectionism. I'm so grateful to you. And I would love for you to share with our listeners where they can find you and learn more about your incredible work.
Yeah, so you can find me at amberpetty.com. If you're interested in writing, I do have a guide to 250 places that pay writers. So it's good if you want to be in magazines or newspapers to support your work, your business, to get more publicity for that, or if you just want to write a personal essay that could possibly be in Huffington Post or something like that. So you can go to amberpetty.com/250 for that. And I'm also Amber N Petty, N for Nicole. Amber Petty was taken. Amber N Petty on Instagram and Threads. That Twitter, no. 1, I'll never stop calling it Twitter. And 2, I am also not there. So
don't go there. Is it not called Twitter anymore? I don't even know.
It's called X.
Oh, that's
it's a terrible idea. Millions of dollars into a horrible idea, right?
Oh my,
Please
that's
share
right.
one
If
of
they
yours.
do it, we can do it. And I just want to shout out your newsletter too. Like, even if you're not a writer, even if you're not looking to get paid to write, if you are a business owner, you are a writer, whether you like it or not. And Amber hosts lots of incredible workshops and programs to help combat perfectionism in your writing. I've been to many of them. Can't say enough good things about the work that you do, Amber. So definitely reach out, get in touch, join Amber's newsletter. Amber, thank you so much for being on the Deeply Rested podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Deeply Rested. If you enjoyed this conversation, I would love to invite you to join the Deeply Rested weekly newsletter. You can sign up at deeplyrested.com/newsletter. I hope to meet you in my inbox very soon.